Greetings, everyone. It's crazy. It's already the second week of 2024. But for this video, I wanted to just do a recap of what I was able to accomplish in terms of reading for 2023, share the titles. Starting last year, I also started implementing a different note-taking system. So in terms of not really notes on what I thought about the book, just basically copying different quotes that strike me from the book, hence my channel, right? So I will be sharing some quotes from some of the books, but not many of them. But I did want to just kind of share what I was able to gather. I was able to accomplish 15 titles, which I know for many people is not very much throughout the year, but I was happy with it. My goal was 20 books, and I was able to do 15, so I was pleased with that. I fell a little bit short. But it's definitely a step up from the previous years. I've been kind of on a lull the last couple of years, especially last year. I actually went down last year from 2021, decreased in title. So I was glad to be back on the upswing. So I'm hoping to accomplish at least 25 this year, but we'll see how it goes. But let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to share this real quick. So typically what I do is I read in categories. So I'm usually in 4 or 5 books at a time, which I know some people say that's probably not a good strategy, but I enjoy it. So my first category is going to have to do something to do with Christianity. So something to do with my faith. So Christian living, theology, discipleship. Usually I'm going to be heading toward, the more theological works, the more kind of heavier books. But it kind of falls into different categories. That's kind of called the Christian category. Second category is history. I'm a big history fan. I was a history graduate, so I'm always in the history book as well. The third category is kind of just a catch-all, right? So a catch-all of nonfiction work that doesn't fit the first 2 categories. So cultural, philosophical, professional development, finance, writing. I kind of just it's a hodgepodge of different things. You can also political writings you can put in there that's not historically based, and then fiction. So let's go ahead and dive in. So the first one is Disciplines of a Godly Man, R. Kent Hughes. This was a solid book, especially if you are a Christian male. I would definitely recommend it. I think it was a solid read, some good strategies for just how to discipline your life and your spiritual life and just life in general. So would definitely recommend it. It was a solid read. No Greater Love by A.W. Tozer. This was an interesting book. So I've read a little bit of Tozer in the past. He was kind of a contemporary around the same time as C.S. Lewis, but here in the States. And this was actually a book he did not write. This was a book based on sermons, I believe, just from the Gospel of John over time. And I did not put the editor on here that compiled it. So I had to put that in the notes or whatever, but I mean in the description. So I'll put it in the description. But it was basically gathered sermons that Tozer preached regarding love from the Gospel of John. Really good read, and I do have one quote for this one. See if I can pull it up here. All right. This is a quote regarding the modern church. I am so thankful that Jesus did not put together some program to entice this woman, the woman at the well, John chapter 4, to come his way. That is what we are doing today. We trick people into coming to church thinking we are doing the Lord's service. Jesus's encounter with the woman was not a well-oiled program from man's point of view. Thinking about this does not encourage me. But how many people have been pushed away from Christ because of the program mentality of many churches today? So that definitely kind of struck me, and just how we kind of go about worship in our church services, etc. I've actually reading some other things that kind of hit on that as well. But all right, let me get back to my screen here. Okay. But that one was definitely a good read. Solid. Recommend that one as well. There's probably only one book overall that I really wouldn't have a high recommendation for, but I'll kind of give my top 1 or 2 from the categories at the end. The next one, The Unseen Realm by Dr. Michael Heiser. So this came out in 2015. Very, very good book. I actually heard about it and kind of knew the premise of the book for years since it came out. I knew several people that had read it, and plus I watched a lot of his Dr. Michael Heiser's YouTube videos. Um, he also has another book that was kind of a more synthesized version of this one, and I'll put that in the description as well. The name is escaping me, but definitely a really, really good book. This is one I would highly recommend for any Christian because it's one of those books, even if you don't agree with the conclusion, it's just such a good read to um, challenge your perception, challenge your perspective. I think so often we read scripture through doctrine, right? Through our doctrinal lenses. And we all, I would say most of us do that to some varying degree or other. But it's so good to step back. But okay, wait a second. Let's come at this text again. That's really kind of my goal is wanting us to get back into scripture fresh, right? So I'm working on some other projects to help us with that. But definitely a good read. I actually agree with a lot of the conclusions Dr. Michael Heiser comes to. But and especially if you are more studying, if you're wanting to study kind of what he's addressing here, he has a ton of sources that he cites in that book as well. So that's definitely a treasure chest you can go down and do a lot of searching. And I do have a quote for that one too. Let me do that one real quick. So this is Yahweh had chosen to accomplish his ends through imagers loyal to him against imagers who weren't. The commitment to humanity, his original imagers on earth, is one often missed reason why, when humanity, Israel, failed to restore God's rule, God took matters into his own hands by becoming human in Jesus Christ. The nations would not be reclaimed by force, but by free imagers choosing to turn toward the true God, the creator and Lord of all. That is from page 215 from that book. All right, next one, Desiring the Kingdom. Let me see something quick here. I believe I have one for that as well. Yes, I do. Okay, so Desiring the Kingdom, Worship, Worldview, and Cultural Formation. So this is actually a cultural liturgies trilogy. So Dr. James K. Smith wrote 3 books. So this book I actually had read several years back, probably around 2014, 2015, somewhere around there. I forget exactly when the book came out, but I was living in Fort Wayne at the time. So I wanted to reread it because I had never read the other 2 books. So they're on the list for this year. Hopefully, at least get through the second book, possibly the third one as well, with what else I have going on. But it's a really, really good book. This um, so it's pretty heavy at times because it's more academically written, but you could definitely track with it. Kind of his whole premise is that we are all created beings, that we are all kind of religious and liturgical by nature. So really our end, so we're not thinking things, we're not thinking beings primarily. Primarily we're aimed toward love. That's kind of our primary trajectory, and we kind of go after what we love, what we set our eyes toward in that fashion. So and kind of the idea of even the world has its liturgies that kind of tell their story without us realizing it. Like that's kind of the beauty of a liturgy if it's done right, if it's done well. And C.S. Lewis kind of talks about this a little bit too, even the letters to Malcolm, which is the next one on here. But um, like like as C.S. Lewis was put it, I'm kind of blending the two. A good church service is one you're really not paying attention to because you're really if it's formed and fashioned to just get you to focus on God, right? So a lot of these cultural liturgies are kind of like that. They're kind of crafting our vision of what a good life is, kind of shaping what we desire our love towards without us being conscious of it. So the idea of our Christian culture should be formed and fashioned to combat that, right, and to be aware of it. So it was a really good book. Like I said, it's a little heavier. Now he has one that kind of synthesizes this idea, kind of like Dr. Michael Heiser did, but that book is called "You Are What You Love." I do remember, and I have read that one too a couple years ago. It's really good. So I definitely would recommend that one if you don't want to go down the more academic one and just do it in one book versus 3. You are what you love. I definitely would recommend it. But here's a quote from this one. Even the most didactic, minimalist, talking head kind of worship will require tongues and ears. Our essential embodiment will keep interrupting our platonic desire to do away with the body, will keep insinuating itself into our dualistic discourses to remind us that the triune God of creation traffics in ashes and dust, blood and bodies, fish and bread. And he pronounces it all very good. So, kind of combating this idea that we can worship just with our minds. Like, no, we're created to be in the physical body, and our worship is going to have that, regardless of how intentional we are with it or how much we try to ignore it or not. We're going to at some form or fashion. So, the more we could be intentional, the better. All right, letters to Malcolm, chiefly on prayer, C.S. Lewis. Big C.S. Lewis fan. I try to get through a C.S. Lewis book and another author, which I'll get to here in a little bit. So, C.S. Lewis, I try to get through one of his books every year, at least one. This is the first time going through letters to Malcolm. Very solid book. Has some really good things to think about in terms of prayer and prayer life, and then even like I said, he kind of gets into church services and hits on different topics. But that's why it's chiefly on prayer. But definitely a solid book. Has some good insights, some good challenges, and I've done some videos from that book, and I got a couple more coming out as well. So be on the lookout for those. And then lastly, The Truth Reformation 2.0 by Luke Abafi. This was a good book as well. So this is more coming from what is becoming more popularly known as pronomian, Christian doctrine, Christian theology. I mean, it's kind of where I plant myself in as well. And it's kind of a combating of, so basically what it is, it's Christian believers who wanted to maintain within the Orthodox Christian camp, so to speak, but we hold to more of the Torah being applicable to the believer's life today than most believers would. Right. So, for example, like a Vodi Bakum or Douglas Wilson, which he's on here, they're definitely going to say that the Torah is applicable, right? So the moral law is still good in the believer's life, which most Orthodox Christianity has adhered to forever. So we just take it a bit further and say we agree with that, but we think that these pieces, which those camps, not to get into a lot of the details, but those camps would say would be ceremonial and they're done away with, that they actually still do apply. Right. So it's the same kind of idea, but taking it a little bit further and saying that some of those things still apply to the believer's life. So that's kind of where I'm at as well. There is a lot of debate on if the term pronomian is good or not, but that's a whole nother thing. But this book was really good as far as the introduction into that. Oh, and I wanted to say the reason why kind of that terminology is coming about, trying to distance ourselves, because what you've seen in the past is people that were kind of in this camp would be like a Messianic Judaism, which is essentially the same thing, but kind of different because those are actually people that do have Jewish heritage that believe in the Messiah. So it is different. But then another one would be like Hebrew roots. But there's just been so much goofiness in those camps along with the good. So much bad theology along with the good, and so much just kind of majoring on things that shouldn't be a major priority or a focus. So this has kind of been a new movement to say, yeah, let's have that theology, but let's kind of leave some of the goofiness out. Sorry, we got some sirens behind me. So it was good. There was some couple things in there that were kind of, uh, I would say, annoying to me. It was well written, but like for example, one thing he continued toward, I would say probably the middle, maybe even earlier, but I remember at least the middle of the book toward the end, calling Abraham Abe. That kind of just rubbed me the wrong way. I don't know why. It's probably not a big deal, but it's just kind of like sand in the chute, right? So it's kind of like there, it's kind of gritty, it's kind of annoying, but overall the book was good. I would recommend it. So for this category, my top recommendations would be, I would say The Truth Reformation would be one, because if you're not that familiar with that theology or why people adhere to it, I think this is a good basis to kind of just start the conversation to kind of get a better understanding where they might be coming from. And I would say The Unseen Realm. I highly recommend The Unseen Realm. Again, even if you don't agree with the outcome or with the conclusion, it's just good to challenge your perspective. So that's that category. All right, moving on to history. All right, The Future of the American Negro by Booker T. Washington. It was a solid book. It wasn't my favorite for sure. I think he had some really good points in there, but a part of it was he was very redundant in this book, which was intentional. I think he was trying to drive home the same points from different perspectives. So it definitely wasn't bad. This was my second Booker T. Washington book that I've read. The first one was Up from Slavery. That one has been in the top five books I've ever read for the past decade for sure. I definitely would recommend Up from Slavery from him. This book was also solid and had a lot of takeaways that I highlighted, but it's not on this system, so I don't have any quotes there from that one. But definitely, it was decent. It had some good insight. So some of the statistics that he was stating, that was interesting because it's almost the same statistics that we see now on a couple points. So that was interesting. Black and Tan, Douglas Wilson. So this one's kind of a cheat. Being in this category, this is kind of a dualistic category because it's really a Christian theological book. That's really the basis of it. So it really should have been in that category. I put it in here because he's dealing with the idea of slavery and the Civil War from a perspective that was very challenging and kind of rubs you the wrong way initially, just because we've been so conditioned to think of the Civil War and to think of the issue of slavery in certain ways. And this was really good. I would say historically accurate and the, theologically accurate as well. But just like Douglas Wilson, he's just so good at um, being the sandpaper that polishes, right? So it's like it rubs you like, wait, what's he talking about here? What is he saying? And it can be seen as controversial, but it was a really, really solid book for sure. I really enjoyed it. It's just a pretty short book with basic compilation of essays. Yeah. So the Civil War by Shelby Foote. So this is actually it's 3 volume. But the one I have, the first 2 volumes are broken up into, I have the first 8 books. So I just read the first book. So basically the first part of the first volume. And this is a very good book as well. Um, what's amazing to me is the preface of this. He talks about, so Shelby Foote was a novelist at the time. He got commissioned to do this work. He had never done nonfiction before. He just was so old school. He actually wrote the whole thing out like on a legal pad and with a pencil. So he said 500 words a day was a phenomenal day. The work itself is over right around a million words. Quite the achievement, especially to write it all out. At the time, obviously, when he wrote it, I think it was the 50s, if I remember correctly. So no word processors anyway, but he had, typewriters were around, but he decided to write it all out. And he kind of attacked it like a novel. So he would make character storyboards and all these different things. So it's very intriguing read. It's very heavier, obviously, because it goes into a whole lot of details. I mean, being a million words on the one subject being the Civil War, but that was good. In terms of which one I would recommend out of this category, I would say probably Black and Tan, because even though it's from a Christian perspective, and it's really mostly dealing with Christian theology. So that would, as far as the history lovers, that would probably be more of a turnoff. But just the fact that it was so abrasive to what would consider kind of our normal uh, history of the Civil War, and again, so similar to the Unseen Realm, whether you agree with it or not, I think it's just really good to read it to challenge the perspectives, challenge how we normally view this topic. So I will pick that one for my recommendation. The Civil War is good too if you are just a history buff and you really enjoy the Civil War. But for most people, they're not going to want to read a million words on the Civil War. That's why I would say Douglas Wilson. Again, Booker T. Washington, this is not a bad read, but definitely start with Up from Slavery from him. All right, the next kind of the hodgepodge, right? So we're got some financial books first. How Money Works, Stop Being a Sucker by Tom Matthews and Steve Seibold. Very good read, very quick read. Like, and I'm not a fast reader. Like, obviously, you could tell only 15 books in the year, um, and I read this in a day. So it's not very long. It's easy to get through, but just kind of its foundational principles on finances and financial or money management. So this probably wouldn't be for everybody. Some people are obviously, clearly are doing pretty well in that realm. Even if you are, this might be a good kind of refresher. Just make sure everything's on track, or if there's some things you want to go back and double check on, kind of circle back around to. If you are struggling with money management, highly recommend it. It just lays out the basics in such an easy, digestible, approachable way. So especially if it's a topic you try to avoid, just because it frustrates you so much, definitely a good read. You are a badass at making money. This is okay. So the asterisks here, I actually didn't finish this book. I got most of the way through it. Wouldn't highly, this would be the one I wouldn't really recommend. It was okay. Now I will say, and again, so if you are kind of finance is kind of your thing, that's the realm you're like to be in, you might want to take another look. That you might be more encouraged to take another look at it, or if you're trying to get into it. She did have some really entertaining stories, kind of just about her journey. But overall, it wouldn't be a highly recommended one for me. Economic Facts and Fallacies. So really solid book, Thomas Sowell. So this is the other author along with C.S. Lewis. I try to get through a Thomas Sowell book, at least one every year. One of my favorite authors for sure. This was a solid book. So again, if you want to, this will be the third one in the list from last year that just challenges perspectives. So if you're looking at for a book that just kind of challenges the norm of what we're fed, um, he's so good at just asking questions and getting to another layer of things and just clarifying what we're told in the media that's normal just by asking better questions. So this was no exception to that style. And again, it has to do with in the realm of economics. He is an economist by trade. So this is up his alley on top of just his normal thorough research that he does. So it dealt with subjects like you will see the economic disparity between races in America. He deals with that. I don't like using the word race. I would say ethnicities, but I believe he used race between men and women, between college students, college graduates, and non-college graduates, among many other things. So yeah, definitely a good read. Again, another one that's good for challenging perspectives. And the last one, The Naked Communist, by Skousen. This book was definitely an eye opener. I'm gonna come back to this one actually here in a second. So, but out of this category, just on the basis of their own merit, I would do the two. So How Money Works, because it's such a short read, and then Economic Facts and Fallacies, just because it's so good at, again, challenging perspectives, thinking outside the box. So again, it's not about whether you agree or not, it's how can I think about these things differently. That to me, at least in my opinion, is one of the reasons I like to read, right? So it's how can I look at this topic from a different perspective? So that one is the one to read out of this category. So the fiction, I only did two last year. They were both Mr. Doyle, so Sherlock Holmes, A Study in Scarlet, and The Sign of the Four. I've read a good handful of the Sherlock Holmes books in the past, but I know I hadn't gone through them all. So I kind of just started the series over. So these are the first two books in the series. And yeah, highly recommend. I mean, he's such a good author. Sherlock Holmes is a great series if you're into detectives and mysteries and those kind of things. I mean, I would say most people are probably pretty familiar with them. They're both really good. I would just say start with A Study in Scarlet, because if you haven't gone through the series before, or if it's been a while, just start at the beginning. These are the first two books, so Study in Scarlet, I would just start there. All right, so that's it. That's a recap. So again, I would say as far as the highly recommended ones, Unseen Realm, The Truth Reformation 2.0, Black and Tan, Economic Facts and Fallacies, How Many Works, and A Study in Scarlet. Now, I'm assuming most of my viewers are in America. Obviously, we've been going through some interesting times, to say the least. And it's 2024, so we are in an election year, as we are all well aware of. Um, with that being the case, I really want to recommend The Naked Communist And the Naked Communist, it is a thick book. I'm not gonna front about it, and it's I kind of put it in this category just because it is dealing with politics, but it does have a lot of history. So kind of basically what it's doing is talking about kind of the roots and the rise of communism for the first part of the book, and then the second part of the book it goes into kind of the communist agenda and how it's been infiltrating in America. So Mr. Cleon or Skousen was in the FBI kind of during the whole McCarthy era, and so seen a lot of things firsthand. And this is a 2017 update, so they've added some things in. But go through this book, even if you don't read the whole thing. It is thick. I mean, obviously, we still have some, most of the year ahead of us. Just go through this book, and I'll also even say go through a little bit of Black and Tan. Again, it's not about agreeing or anything. It's about coming into this election. I think we need to really take a step back and just kind of reform our thinking and recalibrate our vision for what we desire our nation, where we desire our nation to go. And I think that's going to be a much more complex issue than this election is going to accomplish. And plus, I think we need to be more primarily focused on local elections anyway. But with that being said, definitely just I would encourage you go through the Naked Communist, even the second half of it. Kind of hit a little bit of Black and Tan. And there's a third book. It's called Slaying Leviathan. I think the author is Glenn Sunshine. It's also by Canon Press, which comes out of Douglas Wilson's camp. But it kind of goes through the history of politics, basically. So just kind of do a survey of that one as well. Going through this one really kind of tripped me out. Just how intentional things have been in our culture. Obviously, the shifting and the shaping and the forming of the changing of definitions has been huge. That's really where most of the fight has been. It's been over the dictionary and claiming what terms mean and what they don't mean over the last several years. But even little things like whether you agree politically with being a moderate or not, something I did notice all growing up, even when we first started, people my age started voting and everything, you always heard about the moderates, right? So you had the moderate right, the moderate left, and how most people were moderates. From my recollection, since like President Obama, that has just completely dropped from vocabulary in recent any kind of political commentary. Everybody's right wing or left wing, right? Everybody's on the extremes. And I think that's been intentional in terms of trying to pit us more and more on different sides and only two sides, right? I mean, not that there's more than two sides, but the fact that there's only two political parties when we should have at least three strong parties in our country. But that's a whole nother thing. I just encourage you go through these books, especially the Naked Communist, at least the second half of it, and just see how things have been intentionally shaped and formed. And this stuff like even modern art, something so simple as that, that's just been on the rise. I mean, for decades now, but over the last, 20, 30 years, how that's been intentional. Because what art is supposed to do, like if you see a sculpture, right? And this the whole tearing down all these monuments last several years, the idea of a monument is to, kind of draw us up in a sense. This person, this normal everyday person accomplished this great feat or this great task or lived this extraordinary life. And that's supposed to kind of draw us up, right? It's supposed to inspire us, whether even if you agree with the person or not, what they did, what they accomplished, but just like, okay, they were able to do this extraordinary thing, being a normal person. I think sometimes I think we get lost in that. We're all in the same boat, right? So the fact that I could do the same thing, I have the ability to achieve something just as great, even if it's a different realm or a different position or what have you. And so the idea of modern art is to strip away all that. It's to strip away drawing us up. It's just to be like it loses all its meaning and value. So something I never really thought about before. So there's a whole bunch of those kind of examples in here. Check it out before we hit them. Hit the election boost if you are going to do so. Anyway, not get into all the politics now. That is the recap from my reading last year. I hope you had a good year reading last year as well. And yeah, drop in the comments what was your top one, two, three books from last year. I love to hear your thoughts. If you've read any of these books, share your thoughts on that as well. And I would love to hear what you read, and maybe I can add it to my list in the upcoming years as well. So appreciate your time. Be blessed. Oh, hold up, hold up, hold up. There was another quote I forgot. This is from Thomas Sowell, Economic Facts and Fallacies. Here is the quote. For more than 2 centuries, one of the most persistent explanations for poverty, whether in the third world or elsewhere, has been overpopulation. But the term has seldom been defined in any meaningful way. That is, in any way that is not tautological. If the term is used to refer to the ratio of people to land, then an even cursory examination of data demonstrates that is false. There's Thomas Sowell for you, digging into the definitions. So I wanted to make sure I got that quote to you. And now we are completed for 2023. Looking forward to what you read and what you have planned for 2024. Hit me up in the comments. Be blessed.